If you've ever had someone move a Jira work item to done without filling in critical details, let's go over exactly what workflow validators are, how they differ from conditions, and the simplest way to set one up to keep your workflows running. If you don't know who I am, my name is Josh. I founded Grid.io, and we've helped thousands of teams get the most out of Jira and Atlassian. If you're interested in working with us, feel free to hit the first link in the description down below to schedule a free consultation. So what is a Jira validator? Essentially, it's a workflow condition in Jira that requires specific criteria to be met after the user transitions to a new status, as opposed to a workflow condition, which checks the criteria before showing the user the transition button. Let's take a look at some practical use cases. So jumping into my IT support project here, I'm going to pull up a service request. This one here is from Alan, and he is requesting the guest Wi-Fi access. Before I do that, I want to require the ticket to be assigned. So in this case, I could go ahead and just move it to in progress. And there's going to be no requirement for me to actually set the assignee. I could go ahead and update the ticket. Now we've moved this into in progress. There is still no assignee. We could move this all the way to done without ever assigning the ticket. This can obviously cause huge problems for reporting. This is one really practical and simple example. There could also be a lot of other use cases for this. Priorities is a really common one. Due dates if you have a more board style view, as well as request types within JSM projects. So let's say we want to have the ticket require assignee before we go into in progress. I'm going to go back to my project settings. We're going to go over to our workflows. Then from here, I'm going to find my service request workflow, which is the issue type of the ticket I was just looking at. I'll click on the edit workflow button. Now in this workflow, I'm going to go ahead and find the transition to in progress. So if I hover over these transition arrows, you can see that I found in progress. If I click on that, it should isolate all the transitions that are going into in progress as long as they're shared. So once we have the transitions highlighted, so if I look on the right side here, there are no conditions and no validators as of right now. And all we have to do to create one is just click on the validators button, and that'll bring us to this page here. Here we could click the add a validator button. Specifically for assignee, I'm going to find the field required validator and click on add. There are two fields that we need to fill out on this screen here. The first one is going to be the field that we actually want to require, and I'm going to pull up assignee. I'm going to click on the drop down, search for assignee, and go ahead and click on that. I could also require multiple fields within this single validator rule. I do tend to keep these separate. That way the error message is a little bit more accurate depending on which fields are missing versus already filled out if you have multiple validators for one transition. And the second thing that we need to fill out is going to be the error message. And I use something simple like please enter value for assignee. And this is pretty critical, even though it is optional. It will tell the user who's actually making that transition what needs to be fixed before that transition can happen. So once those two fields are filled out, I'll click on add. And now in this list of validators, I can see the exact requirements and the message that I just created. Last thing to do is to publish this draft, and our new workflow will go live. So I'll head back to my IT project now, and I'll pull up a random service request ticket. I'm gonna go ahead and make sure that this is unassigned. And let's go from waiting for support into see if we get any error messages. So we have this screen pop up. I'll click update without assigning the ticket. Then we get this error message at the top, which we just created. Now you'll understand why that optional field is actually pretty critical. Otherwise we wouldn't know exactly what went wrong. I'm gonna assign this ticket to me, and I'll try that one more time. So it's as simple as that to create your very first workflow validator. Now let's take a quick peek at the other options that we have. So this is the list of options that we have to set as our validators. The first two are date related, and they specifically check date fields to meet a certain requirement. For example, if we want a date to be selected 1 or more weeks in the future, we can do that with one of those validators here. Field has been modified validator. This essentially requires a field to have been changed at some point before this workflow can move forward. So the field can technically be empty, but it has to have been changed on this ticket before the transition can happen. Field has a single value. This specifically applies to fields that are multi-select. And if they are multi-select, it essentially requires only one option to be allowed when moving forward. These two here are both related to forms, attached and submitted. This is primarily going to apply to Jira Service Management project, but it essentially requires either a submitted or attached form to the ticket. Parent status validator looks at the parent ticket and makes sure that it's in a specific status. For example, in progress. Permissions validator pretty much just checks if the user actually has permission to make that transition. Previous state validator requires the workflow to have gone through a specific status before moving forward. Regular expression is just regex, a little bit more advanced, but can be applied to specific fields. User permission validator, also similar to permissions validator, a little bit more advanced and used in very specific use cases, but personally, I just stick to using the permissions validator. As you can see, you could get pretty granular with the workflows that you're building within Jira. It's a very robust feature and really one of the best reasons to actually use Jira within your own organization. One thing that I always tell teams is to never overcomplicate and create too many validators within a workflow. The more validators you have, the longer it takes and the harder it is to actually move tasks forward. Personally, I like to find alternatives and use validators as a last resort. With the assignee example I just showed, I would rather build an automation that just auto-assigns the ticket whenever it goes into in progress to whoever triggered that transition. That way the agent or user never actually has to worry about assigning the ticket, and they also never have to deal with the validator. It really does make a big difference for your team to work with less friction and keep pushing their tasks forward as easily as possible. I look at validators almost as a last resort when I have to require specific fields, especially for reporting reasons, but I always try to find alternatives before implementing them. If you're still confused about your workflows and how they work, feel free to check out this video up here where I do a very basic overview on how to create your first workflow.